like to welcome you and call to order the Port Orchard City Council work study session for March 21st. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So, council members, I'd like to ask your indulgence tonight to add a business item, which I know isn't our normal process, but it happens, probably once a year where something is time sensitive, and we have a time sensitive matter. This afternoon, after the close of business, we did finally get the application from the group for the South Kitsap High School graduation parade, and our code requires that applications of this nature have 120, need to be submitted 120 days before the event. Where are we? It's going to happen sometime in June. So we're within that time frame. It still needs to be, when we take it at the applicant says they're going to bring the $50 check, which is the cost of the city, tomorrow. But I don't want to wait another week to delay this before we get this out to the state and fire and transit and all the other agencies that need to look at this. So we really want to. So tonight we'd just be taking action to accept the application, approve of the application. You would be waiving the 120-day period, and then it still needs to run through its normal process to be approved by all the outside agencies, and then it'll require your action a second time to approve the actual road closure once the other outside agencies have approved the traffic control plan. So we're not, we just got it, like I said, within about an hour and a half ago. And so if you wouldn't mind if someone would consider making a motion to add this to this evening's agenda, Councilmember Trenary.
I make a motion to add the approval of the special events application for the South Kitsap 2023 graduation cruise to the agenda tonight.
Second.
A motion by Councilmember Trenary, a second by Councilmember Lucarelli, and I would ask that we make this our first business item. Knock it out. Sure. So a motion and a second to add this to this evening's agenda. Any further discussion or questions of me or the clerk, who's been on the phone most of the afternoon on this? So, Mr. Trenary, Councilor Trenary.
I just have a question, procedural question. Not as it pertains to this necessarily, but in the application process, typically, when the application is presented, is it stamped, date stamped, presented, and accepted when it's complete? Or can they present it and then add things to it later after it's been accepted at the clerk's office?
We've allowed both. So ideally we want everything up front. When they submit the application, I review it when I take it in. And then after I route it or I have more time to thoroughly review the application, I reach back out to the applicant and say, hey, we need this additional information. So we've done both. It's acceptable to put in an application and need modifications later on.
All right, thanks.
It's not unheard of at all. Or the police or fire have questions or concerns and something that needs to get modified in the application. But no different than a building permit or any other type of permit. If we get everything all at once, we can get it in and get it out and not have a whole bunch of back and forth. But sometimes there's questions they ask.
Yeah, just curious as to when that clock actually starts, that 120-day clock actually starts.
Councilor Clausen.
Yeah, question. You had mentioned we've got the application, but we don't have the fee. How does the fee relate to the processing?
It's just our processing fee in our code is $50 for any special event.
But we're going to go ahead and process it even though we haven't received the fee, is that?
Well, this is just time sensitive, and we're taking the applicant who Brandy spoke to this afternoon after business, after we closed in the finance department and go home, that they said they would be in the morning to take care of this. So obviously this isn't going to go very far if we don't get the application fee, but we're taking them at their word that they're going to submit the fee, the $50 fee, and that we're charging forward on this as quickly as we can, because it has to touch a number of other agencies before it comes back to you.
Well, I was gonna volunteer, if they don't show up in the morning, I'll cover the $50 fee so we can get the process.
I think the goal of tonight's action is is for the council to allow staff to accept and process the application, including accepting the fee.
Yeah, and waiving the 120-day requirement.
No, I
That's the
appreciate
big
that side
change.
of it, but I would, like I said, I don't wanna hold this up because they didn't come in with their fee, so I would volunteer. I'll pay the $50 fee if they don't show up in the morning, so.
I might split it with.
Can we use your car as collateral?
I'll pay in cash.
With a serious question, just with the road closures, is there any reason they need certified flaggers?
If you're,
If they're stopping traffic.
if they're stopping traffic on the right of way, that's something different.
Okay, but I just, from
We're
looking
not,
at the
there's,
map,
there's some
it's lots of-
logistics still to be worked out with the traffic control plan. They don't actually have a traffic control plan at this point.
Okay, I just was looking at the map there, and when I saw, along with certified flaggers, which is, can be an impediment.
Correct.
On that, I was just curious.
It's not insurmountable to get volunteers though trained.
No, it's not, I've been one, so,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, thanks.
Jake just volunteered.
We'll see.
And just to clarify, they have hired a traffic control plan agency to conduct that, so we're just
Good.
waiting for the final plans to be received tomorrow.
I appreciate that. Other questions before you vote on this action? Okay, you'll be voting on accepting the application, special event application for the South Kitsap High 2023 graduation parade and which waives the 120-day period. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, let's get down to what we had on the agenda. Number one is Ms. London and Ms. Archer, and we're going to talk about city council pay. So take it away.
All right, I will go ahead and get started. This came up last fall, and the finance committee looked at this in January, wanted it to come to this whole group for further discussion. So lots of numbers. The first thing I'm going to mention is that we've worked really hard in city policy and in city contracts with our labor unions to remove manual processes from our payroll system. Your pay is a manual process because you only receive 24 paychecks a year, and the city pays 26 times a year. We pay every other week. So that is something, if you are so inclined to change your compensation, that we would like to make everything evenly divisible by 26, please. So that's the first kind of overarching concept here. The other,
Can I interrupt?
Yes.
For a second, this quick question, when you say make it divisible by 26, right now, we are essentially getting $500 gross per paycheck that we receive, correct?
you receive, correct.
So if we were to increase the salary to get to 26, we'd have to add $1,000 to the annual.
Yeah,
And that would do your
correct.
divide evenly by 26.
Whatever we settle on, if we can look at it as on an annual basis rather than
Right,
a
right.
per paycheck or monthly basis, and then we can just convert
Or
them
the
out.
other one would be, well, our current pay is 12,000 a year, basically, so you take that divided by 26. instead
If it was
of 4.
13,000, for example, it'd be
Yeah,
not a
so
problem,
that
right?
Each check would be whatever the appropriate amount less than what it is currently. It would just get, we get 2 more checks in the year.
Yeah, in the
Okay.
spring and in the fall, you get that 3 paycheck month, right? So the first option that was presented to you is kind of a, I'm just gonna call traditional model. We take our neighboring jurisdictions, much like we did for the non-represented salary study a few years back, and average them out. You've seen this number before. It comes out to, let's talk about annual numbers. It comes out to 18,000 and change. There was some concern that the large amount that Bainbridge Council receives was skewing that number. So if we peel off Bainbridge, it then obviously lowers that average down to 12,000 and change for the year. Just $790 more than what you're currently at. Then, of course, I mean, it's numbers. You can play with them as much as you want. You could take the high and the low away. So you do that. You, number one, have a very small sample size. But it does, again, change the average. So the average then becomes 14,005 and change for the year. The other option that I'm aware of and familiar with, I'm calling Option Aberdeen, is what the city of Aberdeen does. Where they're tracking the COLAs throughout the year, because you can't affect pay for your current term. But they're tracking the COLAs, and that's shown on page 8 of your materials in the memo that went to the Finance Committee. And if you track all of that out and calculate that all out, it creates an average of 15,000 and change. So all kinds of ways to slice the pie, so to speak.
And Debbie, what you did to get to that $15,000 number is that you took the last moment in time that the council pay was increased and captured all of the COLA increases that our represented groups have gotten. You don't have to pick that number. I sure like this methodology, whether that's the right number or not, because it just happens, and every 2 years, 4 of the council members are gonna get the COLA, because you can't vote yourself a raise, but in this methodology, it just happens. And then and then 4 get it the following 2 years.
And it's been 10 years. The last time council pay was set was 2013. There's been 11 non-represented pay increases since then, because in 2019 there were 2 of them, 2 small ones that were timed with the union contracts. And then, per your request, Charlie provided some information on the establishment of a, what's that called, salary commission? I don't know if you wanted to address that.
Yeah, so I think my memorandum walks through the processes of establishing a salary commission and the constitutional framework that authorizes the use of a salary commission. As Debbie mentioned, you are prohibited from increasing your salary while you are in office, and a salary commission as a separate entity allows for an increase to occur. I've provided some anecdotal information about other agencies that utilize salary commissions, and some of the comments, while yes, it may seem as though that body is a tool to increase during a term, and not saying that that's the goal here in any way, but that's not, in practice, that's not, the salary commission has the absolute purview to do what they want to do with the salary. City of Linwood had a salary commission created in 19 and very quickly dissolved it. I think the lack of volunteers and the lack of information comparables, I will say, were sort of some of the reasons that they decided to back away from it, according to news media sources. Other agencies have found it to be difficult to fill. It's another citizen volunteer group. I know Debbie's been trying to fill Civil Service Commission.
We finally did.
Yeah. So that's an example that took a number of years, and these bodies can be difficult to fill. And they are, I think the third note from other agencies that I've heard is they are administratively run by staff, so you are completely hands-off, and that's additional work for your staff related to managing. The staff essentially has to prepare the comparable studies or whatever information the commission decides that they would like to see, and often has to sort of encourage them towards the information that may be useful to them, given that they may not have done this type of work before. But that's another operational issue related to salary commissions that I've heard. Another option for increases outside during the course of your term that I've also referenced in the memo, as well as the salary commission, is an automatic salary increase by ordinance that you would set in place. So you could pass an ordinance that would do the catch-up COLA for the Aberdeen model, but then also gives you an automatic COLA each year moving forward. And so that's an increase that could occur on a regular basis that you have set via ordinance that could occur during your term.
I don't think
to
it
keep
can
up.
happen during their term, though.
It can happen during their
If
term.
it's not, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding, if it's not discretionary, it can't be tied to what the non-union COLA would be, for example. It have to be a
Correct.
fixed number, like each year 2%.
Well, it could be COLA, I'm sorry, it would start after their initial term. I'm sorry, it couldn't happen in this
No.
term. But you could pass an ordinance for your next term, and then when you come into that term, each time it would be an automatic adjustment that would
At
occur.
at each election.
Each year of
On
that
an
next
annual
subsequent
basis.
term. Yeah, on an
Now,
annual basis.
we had something similar to that before,
Oh,
and we were advised by legal counsel that it could not happen.
oh, okay, well, it can happen.
There are cities doing that.
Okay, all right.
Those
You get the
attorneys.
right answer, you change
Yeah.
your
Attorneys.
Well, that's everything to get.
I would-
It depends.
It was early on in my city council time,
Yes,
so,
I remember it well.
few firms ago, but,
Okay.
all right. It's your guys' decision, you guys do what you want, I just ask that you don't do a salary commission.
Quick question on the salary commission, contrary to the mayor's feelings. Is there a set schedule for which the commission would review, or is it up to the commission? They could do it annually, every 5 years, every 15 minutes, it's up to them to decide how often they want to review.
So, two thoughts. One, to the mayor's point, or to the mayor's comment, I want to make clear that you can have a salary commission that just considers council salary, and you can still keep the mayor's salary distinct. So the conversation I'm presenting and discussing today is council salary.
Right.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So then to answer that question, there's no statutory regularity with which the commissions must meet. And so honestly, just to the comment I made moments ago about the burden being on staff, they tend to have to be staff scheduled, and staff initiated is the wrong word, because the staff is not supposed to be the one initiating, it should be the commission, but you have volunteers, so it is usually staff initiated. And it varies widely, so there's one commission I'm aware of that meets every 3 years, Puyallup meets 3 times a year. So it really depends on interest level and participation. The city that they meet every 3 years, they actually disband each time, so they have to create a new commission
I was
each
gonna
time.
say, that would be, in my mind, one of the challenges. It's tough enough to get a volunteer group, but then say, well, thank you for your work, we'll see you in 3 years.
Right.
And hope they remember that they volunteered 3 years ago.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I'll just follow on that, and their work will probably consist of sampling local jurisdictions to see
Just
what they're
exactly
doing.
right.
They're gonna look at the same thing you
Yeah.
guys are looking
So,
at.
you know, I don't think anybody could accuse us of being abusive of our salaries, it hasn't changed in 10 years. So I'm not in favor of the salary commission.
Yeah, I'm not either,
I'm
but
in
I
favor
thank
of
you for
salary commission.
doing the research.
Yeah,
It was-
absolutely.
I actually have a minority opinion. I understand the hardship of the staff, and to me, it would be like the lodging tax advisory, which takes a lot of staff time to prepare, and then you have volunteers, and they're hard to get, I understand. So I understand the mechanics are difficult, but in my opinion, if we are gonna change our salary, it seems like we should be doing it with as much public input, since you could argue that the public is paying. I just feel that it should involve the public. Now, whether or not the public is interested in setting our salary, I don't know. But I think it also looks bad if we, well, not that that's a reason to do it or not, but I
guess-
think it's,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just think it's more, it looks better if someone else is deciding.
I appreciate your point of view from having public involvement. I think I would differ from your point of view that it's similar to the lodging tax, because the folks that participate in lodging tax have a vested interest, whether they're gonna be the recipients of the distribution or they're generating the distribution. They have a reason to be there, whereas this kind of a body would be probably even worse than the Civil Service Commission, because even then, yeah, we only need you when we need you, and the rest of the time, come down and have a cup of coffee once in a while.
Hear from maybe Jay.
Yeah.
Jay and Mark, where I'm hearing 3 against the salary commission. I think that's one step, and then is there merit to, so let's maybe finish that topic first. And
Well, I'm not for a salary commission at all. I think it takes too much staff time. It could be better resourced in other areas. That's my personal.
So it does sound like there's enough support for that aspect of it. Now, step two is, if it's warranted, which, do you want the Aberdeen model, or do you want to do, so, go ahead, Councilman Foster.
You have your hand up first?
Well, I don't think, as you mentioned, it would be abusing our pay if we were to take action once every 10 years. I think there is a certain level of reasonableness that would have to be brought into the consideration, but I'm not opposed to making an adjustment to the council's wages within reason. And then I think as a separate issue, if we were to do that, the Aberdeen model to me makes sense because that makes, whether it's annual or every 2-year adjustment, it makes adjustments so we're not here in 10 years talking about we haven't done anything for 10 years and we need to do something. So I think it is like 2 separate issues. Personally, I kind of favor the Aberdeen so that once we go through this, and it's not easy, then hopefully it will just continue to be adjusted without any more direct involvement, so.
Okay, so let's stick on that topic, the methodology, which is, that's kind of,
Yeah, so stair stepping into it, I totally agree. I think that's one of the frustrating things about salaries and wages is they don't often reflect COLA, and you might be losing year on year. So I'm okay with, I like the COLA approach. So, as to which model after that is
yeah,
next.
that'll be the third topic. So, Jay?
Okay, so just so I understand, Charlie, that the COLA approach, if that's what the council approves, then it just goes into the future, that there's no other action needed by the council.
Except for maybe right sizing it now.
Right, that, yeah, it's a separate issue, but then it happens on a yearly basis or by term or?
Yeah.
So yes, it would happen yearly, so it would be a
Okay.
COLA adjustment, and then it would be staggered as to your positions.
Right.
So
The
the
one-
seats that are up this fall would go into effect next year, they'd get a COLA.
Right, okay.
The rest would catch up then at following 2 years. And then it would happen on an annual basis for those seats.
So we
Moving
could do
forward.
it, so let's,
Two
we'll
thumbs.
get to that part.
Okay, sorry.
The methodology first,
So I'm in favor of that, I think, for as much as I understand it. I do have a question about it, though. Let's say we've got someone changing positions. For example, council at large is a 2-year program. If that council at large goes to a 4-year seat, how does that?
so Mark, our next step will be to decide, one, after you figure out the dollar amount, the frequency. And it could be, Charlie's saying we could do it annually, or it could be done at council terms, either way. And
Right.
this first go-round, it'll have to happen on the council terms. And so what you're referring to,
Yeah.
is if you changed seats to a 4-year seat, would you, so your 2-year seat would happen in November. Let's take people out of it. Your 2-year seat would happen now. These 3 seats over here would happen January 1 also. So your 2-year seat and these 3 4-year seats would happen January 1. The 3 seats on this side of the room, which aren't up for election until 2025, wouldn't happen until January 2026. And then Charlie is proposing thereafter, it's just an annual adjustment for all 7 based on a COLA.
However, correct me if I'm wrong, so I should be looking at her, not you,
Yeah.
sorry, that those folks on the right side would be getting the increase when they're elected and the COLA increase every year. Those folks would not be getting the increase or the COLA until they were elected in 2025.
So if you were gonna do the catch-up increase, is what you're speaking about? The sort of the retroactive COLA cleanup to,
Yeah,
yes, no, the way you're stating it is correct. I would think there could be a way you would write it. The catch-up, you wouldn't be able to
No, I
No.
don't think
project,
they
you
no,
can.
know.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so they would
Because
always be
Yeah,
set.
this side of the room's gonna get
they're not even gonna get
For-
the
for-
yearly
for-
COLA, they won't even get the yearly COLA.
They will not get anything, no,
Yeah, they
they
won't get anything
cannot.
until they're
yeah,
reelected.
Exactly,
Right.
they can't have any increase.
And then everything kind of.
Then it all meshes and it works thereafter.
Self in favor.
Yeah,
And if
And
I
that's
understand
very-
it correctly, once everybody gets reelected into whatever seats, 2026 or whatever, then everybody's would get adjusted on an annual basis,
Moving
and
forward.
everybody would be essentially paid the same.
Be paid the
exactly,
same.
as long as
Yep.
the ordinance that we pass now
Right.
includes that provision,
Yep.
correct.
Yep.
So one of, the three on the left side of the room, one of you could run for the 2-year seat and get the raise next year.
Let's be honest.
If it's about the money.
Presentation.
If it's about the money.
It's not about the money.
All right, so, do we, go ahead, Jim,
I
go ahead.
think the Aberdeen and the COLA method makes sense because it is ignoring, the merit of are we getting what we deserve, which I think should be left to something like the salary commission. But since that's off the table, I think just dealing with what we have, assuming that we agree that our, and I'm not disagreeing, I think the COLA would make sense.
I think, what I hear is we're all pretty much in agreement, so we'll see, you have to say anything with Nicole, at least that portion of it.
Well, the big thing I wanted to do is take the language island out.
Yes.
Well, that's
There's
the,
no
that's
way
the
I
base.
love it.
Yeah, that's the next step.
That's
is
the base.
I know.
How are we gonna do it in the raises?
Well,
Yeah.
they also meet 4 times a month, so there's one extra time, and I suppose they get things thrown at them, but other than that,
It is contentious there.
it is.
Oh, they make a lot of money because they have the higher tax base.
Whatever it is, I just
So,
wanted that.
so I'm hearing the Aberdeen model is supported. I think we would really appreciate it to go to every 2 weeks regardless. And so now where is that, if the math sheet took 15,000, is it 12, where's the starting point to make the COLAs from? And that's the last piece of this, I think, Jay?
Okay, so I wanted to bring this up to the full council, since I was the one that brought this up to the finance committee. I know pay, we talked about altruistic, why we here, why we serve, and I agree with that. But I also think that one of the things we talk about as a council is always trying to get people involved in the city running that are reasonable people, good people, and we need to make sure that they feel valued by their time. Because that's all we have in life is time. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to see us raise our salary. Certainly, I'm not my favorite child. I am in full agreement with everybody. That's insane. I appreciate the Aberdeen model, that finding that Charlie was awesome.
That was Debbie.
And whoever found it, and thank you, Debbie.
You're welcome.
But I think it's a right way to go as we get through this election and then the following election. So whatever the council decides is fair. I have a number, and I'll just start as like,
Give us your number then.
it's 1,200.
Let's work on annual.
Yeah, annual would be,
14,400.
yeah, that sounds good to me. I don't know. I can't
Sounds
do
like,
the
it
math.
sounds like option 2 here is 14,500.
Yeah, or 15,000 if you want to make it round.
Divisible by 26.
And, and
So
stuff.
it'll never be round once we add COLAs.
Yes, I know. So, but it's starting, but that's, yeah, but that's a start. So that's where I was at because, for that reason, to help attract people, to run for council, reasonable people as we start retiring and go from there. That's my 2 cents.
Okay, that one, you're all over the place, but
Okay. For an annual basis, 15,000.
15,000 is what I heard, and that's, which is kind of what the Aberdeen model, 15,200 was all of the COLAs. Mark?
All over the place, thank you.
Well, I want to start this off by saying, I don't think the difference between $1,000 a month and $1,200 a month is going to bring in any new, more qualified people to run for this office and to do this job. I did not look at salary, and I don't think, I can only speak for myself, but I don't think anybody else sitting around this table on the council is doing this job for the salary. gets, it receives. We do this because we have a passion and we want to do things and make things better for our city. So I'm kind of against looking at it as any kind of a real salary increase. Moving forward, I'm fine with where we're at. I could be persuaded pretty easily, I guess, to go up a little bit, but I am concerned in the economic times that we're in, of going too high. You know, even though it's been 10 years, that's not the citizens' fault of the city. That's the council's fault for not bringing this up 6 years ago, 3 years ago, prior to this. So, you know, as far as the retroactive COLAs and the rest of it, I'm not in favor of that. Something moving forward with that, I'm more in favor of. So I guess that's my 2 cents.
So your number, you're advocating then to keep the same salary but add a COLA to it going forward?
Well, option 1 was my favorite, only because it only allowed a 6.59% increase.
So $12,790.
For the council. I think that's, again, I don't think we should, what we do here is important, but I don't think we do it for the money.
Okay, so I heard option 1, I think, out of that.
Can I, one clarification, just because I want to make sure the conversation is transparent. When I said a COLA increase moving forward, that I was using the wrong language. So you could not tie those annual increases to the COLA that you would be affording your bargaining units.
That's what I thought.
Okay, you could tie it to the CPI, you could tie it to another number,
Yeah.
but not the number you're
That was the
saying.
thing.
Yeah,
No, no,
because
understood that.
you are
Yeah.
setting what
Yeah,
you're giving your
understood
bargaining.
that.
Okay.
And much like our contracts, though, I would, you know, the CPI was 9% this year.
Right.
I think if you're gonna do that, you should put collars on it.
Yeah.
Or at least, or maybe a max, our union contracts right now have a minimum 2, a maximum of 4.
Right.
You know,
The state retirement, you're capped at 3, but if you have if the COLA is like 1.5 and you retired at a certain, year when it was higher, then they pull you up to 3. So, I mean, there is a precedence for that. Also, the other thing is, one of the reasons that the CPI was so high was because of energy cost. And there's more than one CPI, as you well know, the former banker, more than one CPI that you can tie to. That's more, excuse the word, reasonable.
we tend to use the Puget Sound, and
Yeah.
that one was it's because it's relevant to our area, but I would just recommend that you guys put
Right.
collars on it.
Sure.
A min and a max.
Yep.
Maybe 1 and 4,
Yep.
or something of that.
Can you do a minimum, Charlie?
I would think you could. I'm not sure if anyone has, but I wouldn't see a reason why
I
you
mean,
would.
if it's a 1% COLA and we say a minimum of 2,
Right. I mean, there's agencies that have picked a finite number, so there will be a 1% each year. So essentially, you'd be picking
So
a
you
finite number.
just
And
do
I
a
would-
fixed number.
Yeah, I would just caution you, if you do that route, that is exactly what all of your union contracts would say, if you take away a bargaining chip as far as at the union table.
So maybe
Like
we-
do a fixed amount versus COLA.
A minimum,
A floor.
if you set a minimum of 2, we lose the argument, set a minimum of 1 in
Right.
union.
We just-
contract.
So what does our collective bargaining agreements now have? Is there?
It's 2 to 4. 2 to 4
2 to
on
4, we
1.
went up to 5 to get a 4-year contract out of our Teamsters.
Yeah.
But you've got a 2% minimum.
I believe it's, I'd have to double check.
In the current deal.
If we-
Yeah,
Yeah.
Well,
I
so
need to
whatever
double
we
check.
pick is gonna make it permanent, but
Yeah.
We could do 0 to
We
0
can
to
just,
4.
I'm more concerned about having a max
Yeah,
than I am
that's
a
what I'm
minimum.
saying.
yeah, no, I appreciate that, and that's why I was questioning the minimum, like kind of 0 to
0 to 4. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that reflects more of what's going on in the economy versus an arbitrary, we want a minimum
Yeah.
of 2%.
Yeah, I did the 0 to 4.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay, so we backtracked, so let's get back to
Sorry.
where we start from.
So I agree with what Mark has said. I'm in favor of option 1. I think Bainbridge Island is off the charts. I don't mind keeping in Gig Harbor as surprisingly low as they are. So I'm down with option 1. I think the reason, maybe just going to 12,800, instead of just keeping it at 1,000 per, is we can at least point to a rationale for where we landed, and nobody could argue that was arbitrary. So I'm in favor of option one.
I'm gonna argue to go to 13, simply because it takes our 12 and adds 2 more paychecks so that we get to every paycheck and it's the same amount. So to go from 24 to 26, it takes about $1,000. And I like the Aberdeen model with 0 to 4.
I'll go 13 to 0 to 4.
Yeah, 13.
So is that option 1.5?
Yeah, well, it's actually about 1.13, but I didn't have my calculator with
So
me.
Jay, did you change your position to join John? Is that-
I'm in John's camp.
Now you're in John's camp, okay, I'm just taking notes here. All right,
The goal would be to cut down on staff time as much as possible, in my opinion. So whatever is easiest that way, and it seems like what we're talking about is one of the easiest, to get it to this 26 payments. I don't feel a need to increase any more than that, I wasn't really looking for an increase. But this does make sense to me.
so you're advocating to stay at the current pay then?
Well, no, the 13,000 because
Okay, sorry,
of,
all right, I got you now,
And you're okay with 0 to 4?
yes,
okay.
I would even, yeah, even go over than 4, but, yep.
But it'll be it'll be
Well,
0 to
that's
4,
max.
tied, that's a max, yeah.
I understand.
And just for clarification, Mayor, so that is based on the 0 to 4 would be the Puget Sound.
That's, what is it we use for all of our other
The
indexes?
CPIU, Seattle, Tacoma, and I think it's called Bellevue now, not Bremerton.
So I was just saying, so we have that language in there.
It will be, it's the
Yeah.
same language we have in our.
Yeah,
our-
no, no, I just wanna make
of
sure
our
that we're-
current contracts.
we're doing it. Okay.
We use the same
Because
index.
it's lower, I'm good with lower.
So that I understand, so we can write this up for your next meeting.
Well, we gotta hear from one more council member
Oh,
first.
sorry, okay. Did I miss? Oh.
Yeah, we'll get, he won't care.
I don't have anything to add.
You gotta
Pick one.
pick.
You gotta pick something.
So I've got 2 that are saying, I think everybody's mostly in agreement about the Aberdeen model, that we're gonna use the CPI that's in our other union contracts, and we're gonna have a 0 to 4%, going to 26 paydays versus 24. I've got 2 council members at $12,800 annually, and I've got 3 council members at $13,000 annually.
Yeah, I would just go with not even changing it at all.
Okay, so that's a third outlier. I'm gonna go back over here to the 2 at 12.8, can you go 13?
Going once, going twice.
I'm fine with going.
Okay, so it sounds like we have enough of a consensus in
I
there.
I have one question, and just because of the write-up and that, I understand the election part of it, but my understanding is you would like to go to the 26 paydays as quick as possible. So would that start next year, or would that start next month? Because I have no problem with if it
As soon as we
starts.
bring this back,
Yeah.
I think
I
we take
need
action.
to, because the math does not work right now, and changing a penny one time a year is worse than not
So
paying
it
you.
would start in.
I think it's gonna be per term. I think when this new number kicks into effect, we'll have 3 of you
Get weird
get
pays.
weird pays,
Four,
yes.
four.
Four,
Yeah,
okay.
the new schedule.
Yeah,
2 years
that-
later,
and
the other
3 would be it.
And we'll let finance
fine.
weigh in if
Yes.
they want to start this after you guys pass this resolution.
Yeah.
And if, because it simplifies things in the payroll department, we might be modifying all of you.
Well,
then.
the only
We'll
reason
talk
I was
about
making that point was, I don't know if it matters how it was written or not. My point of it is, whatever works for finance and HR, I could go to 26 this, you know.
And we're gonna ask finance
Yeah.
what they would
Yeah.
prefer.
Yeah, if it's
Yeah.
next year, that's fine. This year, fine.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
yeah. So just so that I understand, it's the Aberdeen model, but we're minimum of 0, maximum of 4%, and the new amounts won't take effect until the.
Yeah, and with a starting at 13,000, which is actually adding, going for that first, when it gets raised, it'll be 26 paydays of this, what you're getting right now
And we'll bring
versus
it
24.
today, it's 26 instead of
You're
24.
just gonna get 2 more paydays.
And so these people who have to wait to see anything will catch up to the others when those terms come up.
Yeah, 2 years.
Okay.
Now, in that 2-year period, just make sure that the folks that get reelected this next time, they will receive these COLA increases, so when the other 3 finally get reelected, they will be brought up to the level that the other 4 are at.
Yep.
Right,
Without any back pay, yes.
right, no back pay, but you will go
Because we'll have 2 more.
13,000 plus whatever COLA has been applied.
That
during
you
the
didn't
2-year
get
period. Yes,
because you weren't eligible for it yet.
yes,
Yes.
okay, just make sure.
That was my clarification
Yes.
as well, yeah.
Charlie looks confused, but.
No, no, I'm not
there's-
confused. No, I'm just thinking of
Yeah,
it. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
because these guys will get, this side of the room is gonna get 13,000.
No, I get
And then there'll be another COLA.
Right.
On top of that. Then there'll be another COLA and the election happens almost simultaneously.
They'll be able to take
No.
us out for beers.
So 2.5 years, everybody's being paid. the
And then
same.
2.5 years, everybody's the
And
same
I'll
pay.
hold them to it.
Exactly.
If I remember correctly, it was the opposite last time it was raised.
Yes, it was.
This side.
It was this side, because I was on this side.
Oh, interesting. Good memory.
Yes.
Well, I wasn't here, so
I'm
it
just
was a
saying.
nanny boo.
Okay.
I was here, I can't remember, so.
Touche, John.
Here's something for the next time.
John's been here through it all.
Yeah.
All right, that
All
was
right.
a tough one. Oh, sorry.
Well, too bad, we spent 30 minutes when we thought we was gonna take an hour.
Well, the next item is very quick. Did you want me to just jump in? or-
Jump right in,
Okay,
I'm sorry, the
wonderful.
next item is code enforcement amendments.
Not a problem, yes. so
Based
this
on
is-
that, you got 7.5 minutes to get this done.
And I can do it in 7.5.
Clock's ticking.
This is merely a report out to you of something that is coming in the future. Some of these issues are ones that will come in the form of an ordinance, and that's obviously your purview. So we wanted to identify that this body of work is occurring and just hit the high points so that you are prepared. As this is not an ordinance that will go through any committee, it doesn't really fit in any of the committees. So we figured this was the best place to introduce it. So the code enforcement team and myself have been working diligently on a cleanup effort to harmonize existing provisions of your municipal code related to enforcement, penalties, and appeals. In your packets was a spreadsheet we prepared that shows you sort of the constellation of penalties that exist in your municipal code. They are many and varied. Similar to that, your appeal structure is somewhat varied. Some appeals go to the hearing examiner, some code enforcement actions or enforcement actions don't have any appeal procedure. Some actually come to you, some go to the Board of Appeals, the Building Code Board of Appeals. So, and similarly, the act of enforcement itself is varied throughout the code. Some things are enforced by your code enforcement officer, some are enforced by your public works director, some by your development director, and some, that's the highlights of those. So this effort that we are undertaking is intended to harmonize and do a few key things. One, the ordinances will tie all enforcement of code issues with very limited exceptions back to the code enforcement officer as an option. The code enforcement officer has delegated authority in Title 2.64, and that's the code that I circulated. I have a copy, I don't know. Sorry. And so we're gonna add to the list of things that the code enforcement officer is designated to enforce and crosswalk that in other provisions within the municipal code. Second, we're going to now utilize a tool that is currently found in part in your development code as a tool for your code enforcement officer, which is a civil violation. Currently, your code enforcement officer is authorized to utilize an infraction exclusively. And an infraction is something that ultimately results in a potential criminal issue because it goes through your municipal court, and if you were to fail to appear, you could have a warrant for your arrest issued. There has been recent case law related to the delegation of authority to a non-commissioned employee of an agency enacting or taking any sort of code enforcement action that it has a potential criminal element. In order to have a criminal remedy anywhere in the line of that authority, that officer, that individual needs to have a limited commission, a special commission. And we've had this conversation about special commissioning and the change in the law the last few years to require additional training that is very expensive for that individual, actually, and not even available in the state of Washington currently. So this would authorize the code enforcement officer to use civil violations, which are a civil regulatory action in lieu of an infraction. Civil violations appear similar to an infraction, but a key difference is that they can be utilized for voluntary remediation purposes and involuntary remediation, as opposed to an infraction, which is merely, you've done something wrong, here's your ticket, pay your money. A violation, we can build remediation plans that match the violation, as opposed to just asking for money, because the goal of code enforcement is never a moneymaker. It is entirely to try to gain compliance through voluntary compliance and through remediation. As to the remedies and the penalties, we're looking for uniformity across all these different chapters. Again, code enforcement information or violations are found in 2.64 and in Title 20, your development code, and in Title 11, your illicit discharge code. They're scattered throughout. And the penalties, as you can see in the table we included, are varied. We are considering proposing to you a uniform violation penalty at that $200, $250 mark, which would be an increase for some and a decrease for others, but using that as a benchmark across the board as a starting point, and for those to be able to duplicate for repeat offenses. So that will also be included in the ordinance. And then the appellate procedure, we are also proposing uniformity there, and that will be in the ordinance. We want to harmonize, we're suggesting that we harmonize appeals through your hearing examiner. Currently you have 3 different chapters that are titled hearing, some iteration of the words hearing examiner. You have a abatement hearing examiner, a regular hearing examiner, and then you have a plans review hearing examiner. We want to distinguish the hearing examiner's role as an appellate body, both for abatement purposes and for review of regulatory orders and violations. Infractions go through the municipal court, so we're not touching that because, again, those are a separate path. But making sure that every appellate procedure is identical as to the civil regulatory and the civil violation order that we are creating across the board for development and for sign code, for illicit discharge, all of that will all go to the same body. This would mean, and we are suggesting, that we remove the city council as an appellate body for these sorts of regulatory orders. You've probably experienced an ask similar from staff in the past and from legal counsel in the past related to you sitting in an appellate body related to certain permit decisions. We find from an administrative procedure standpoint that having a professional hearing examiner handle those appeals, that it's far more streamlined and it removes you from that process. Key amongst the reasons that we want to remove you from that process is when you sit in that capacity, you are hamstrung from communicating with the public, and your primary goal is to be, or one of the primary goals of electeds is to be the conduit between the citizens, the residents, and the city. And you sitting in an appellate body strips you of that ability. So a professional hearing examiner can take that out of your hands. There are obviously consequences to that. You've lost something that you had. So we wanted to flag that that's a suggestion we're bringing forward to you. And similarly, we're going to set uniform deadlines for appeal procedures. I think this spreadsheet hints at it, but doesn't go as detailed. There are a constellation of different deadlines for filing appeals depending on the violation. We're going to try to bring uniformity to all of that across the board, as well as the appeal fee, which are currently in your fee schedule and are likewise varied as to the type of appeal. And those appeal fees are typically set, as all of our fees are, to merely scratch the surface of trying to cover your administrative cost of processing. Cities are absolutely not in the money-making business, nor can we be under the state constitution. So our administrative penalties have to be tied directly to our fees have to be directly tied to our actual administrative costs. Yeah.
Do you have an example of what that fee is currently?
Actually, Brady, do you know the appeal fee? I think it's $500, which is fairly low. City of Burien, for example, I think is at $3,000. It depends on the city, but we typically try to have it cover your administrative costs, but it barely sort of scratches the surface of your cost of your hearing examiner. But we can confirm that. I believe it's 500.
Personally, I like the idea of using the hearing examiner because that takes politics out of the decision.
450.
450?
450.
That's reasonable. I think that's fine.
And that does cover our costs?
I would not think it does.
Not even
No.
close.
Not even.
Not even close.
No. But you have to balance.
The budget for that.
It doesn't happen very often.
Right.
That's the unfortunate thing.
So that's the end of the overview. Again, this is forthcoming. We're probably 1 to 2 months out to bring this to you for an initial review in a council meeting and an associated public hearing, so if you so wish. One is not required for this, but we absolutely can schedule one if you'd like. And so then I'm happy to answer any questions, or we can move on to the next item as well.
All right. Questions
I
for Cheryl?
want to say I support the hearing examiner model. I think it's proven its value in jurisdiction.
Takes it to an independent body.
But I think we should talk about the fees covering the costs.
Well, I don't know, it's, I mean, a
Do we
hearing
know what the
examiner,
cost is?
I wish Nick was here, he could tell us
Well,
that.
I can relate to you, having gone through the contract provision for hearing examiners. We
He's
charge.
online if you wanted to comment.
Is Nick,
Yes.
I don't see him. Nick, you there?
I'm here. What's the question?
What does the hearing examiner charge us to come and conduct the hearing?
It varies depending on the time involved in the hearing itself and in writing a decision, though it is less now that we hold them online. I still think it runs, $1,000 to $3,000 on average, and if it's in person, closer to $5,000.
How are we recouping those fees?
We pass through the fee to the developer.
So he's referring to hearing examiners who are doing permit
Yeah.
review.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this would be the same concept, but we're charging 500. You want to charge, I don't know that,
No, I'm just concerned about the,
Yeah.
covering the costs.
Additional costs for hearing
Yeah,
and
because
It sounds
it's
great,
steep.
but what's the cost?
Well, it's also, I think you have to balance the fact that we're talking about a fine, pick one of these things that, $120, and it's gonna cost you $3,000 to appeal it. There seems to be an inequity there.
Agreed, but should the city pay the 3,000 or should
No,
the
I-
appellant pay?
we're going
I
to.
guess we could charge $3,000 for the violation. But you get my point, at some level, it's more cost effective just to pay the fine, even though I think it's against my rights and whatever.
I can assure you that we don't make any money on the citations and the public process we have in our court. It's what's right and what's just. We owe it to the public to
But
have come.
it's in our opinion that you were wrong.
Yes.
But for you to appeal my opinion, it's gonna cost you 16 times the cost
Yeah.
of the fine.
Well,
That's my point.
I mean, the folks that come for a $20 parking ticket, our public process in our court is costing us 20 times that,
Right.
It's just, we've got to make it reasonable and fair. I hear what you're saying. I think $500 for a $100 fine is probably a lot, but we have to charge something.
Can you do a sliding scale for the appeal based on the fine value? I mean, I'm going through here looking at 150 up to 5,000. If it's a $5,000 fine, then it probably should be more than 500, but if it's a $100 fine, nobody's gonna ever appeal it.
Wasn't there a phrase, frivolous appeals?
I'm sorry?
Isn't there a phrase, frivolous appeals, though?
Yes, I can look at a sliding scale. I'm not aware, I believe I'm aware of sliding scales in the sense of dependent on income, but I'm not sure about dependent on the violation.
I like that model, John. I really do. I mean, because it would definitely make somebody think twice about something, you know, on that end, taking it, because on one hand, it'd be, oh, $500, I'm willing to spend $500 to make sure the city spends $3,000, but I'm not so much for, you know, making it be a pain. I'm looking at the negative side.
No, I appreciate that, but it's one of those things where, you know, the principle, the thing, my fine is $100. Am I really that strongly against the city that I'm gonna spend 500, so the city's gonna spend 3?
No.
No,
No.
I'm gonna pay the $100 and,
Some people would.
But on the other, but as it goes up higher,
yeah, I think it's appropriate that it
Yeah.
should go up.
Yep.
I kind of like the income base, but that just administratively would be a nightmare.
right,
I think if you were just categorized, if your fine is between 100 and 5, it's this much. If it's 501 to 1,000, it's this much.
yeah,
Make it simple, but
I like it.
Okay. I will
Wayne,
look at that.
please.
Yeah, absolutely.
so we'll go for 500 at the low range and then whatever, 750 to 1,000 or whatever.
Well, and I'll get the specific numbers because the hearing examiner process that Nick's describing is a bit more robust than
Yeah.
the
Right.
abatement hearing, which, and our abatement hearing officer is actually your judge.
Our
So,
judge.
not your professional hearing examiner. He's professional, I didn't mean to disparage the judge.
I know, our judge.
If you can do it online, that makes it even less expensive, so if that's a
That's huge.
require it, but certainly keep our costs down some.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's definitely an option.
Okay,
Okay, we
thank
ready
you.
for the third item?
There's a hand up for the next item.
This is Charlie again.
I'm gonna go get a bottle of water. Anybody else want one?
That'd be great, thank you, sir.
All right. Our third item this evening has to do with the city's unauthorized trespassing camping on public property policy. We discussed this policy in the fall, and we had a robust conversation about the policy and procedure with staff, and staff are present this evening to continue that conversation. There are a couple of things that bring us back to discuss the policy again this evening. One of which is we have now had the opportunity to implement the procedures set out in the policy, or in the procedure document rather, through your code enforcement officer, Christine, who is a wonderful addition to the city. She has utilized this procedure in a couple of different settings, and I'll categorize those in part. One, the cleanup of abandoned campsites, where the majority of the work is actually done by your Public Works Department, but Christine is the coordinating force behind it, communicating with agencies in the area to confirm that the campsites are abandoned, working with Public Works to post the site and then to ultimately clean up the site. So we have implemented the procedures as to abandoned campsites and made some slight modifications in response to our findings of implementation of abandoned campsite cleanups. But I would absolutely say that those have been highly successful, and Christine is monitoring and working very closely to make sure that those aren't reestablished. And Public Works has likewise worked hard to ensure that those spots are not reestablished through the use of trimming vegetation and other means.
And the creation of moguls.
Moguls, yes.
I saw those.
The second area where we have implemented, and this triggers this revisiting of the policy, has to do with occupied campsites. So where we have individuals who are members of the unhoused community present at a campsite in violation of our particular regulations. We have had one of those cleanups utilizing the procedures set out here, and that process involved the code enforcement officer working very closely with the HART team coordinator pursuant to our agreement to relocate the individuals at the campsite. As is somewhat common in these situations, this particular location had turnover of individuals on the site, so HART was able to relocate some of the occupants of the encampment, and then new folks moved in, and Hart was attempting to work with them as well, and Christine was notified by the Hart coordinator that they had made outreach to those individuals. Christine was successfully noticing the campsite as well, and scheduled a cleanup event. Unfortunately, when the cleanup event occurred, those individuals remained on site. And so the decision was made to clean up only the areas that had been actually abandoned and leave in place the individuals who were present. From that learning event, we have now modified some provisions in the procedures, but I do want to be clear that that event and the modifications to the procedures are merely operational. So we have ticked all the boxes as far as ensuring that those individuals were offered services, but that learning opportunity notified us that there are individuals who, despite having been offered services, are not interested in leaving. And so rather than have any sort of confrontation or anything of that nature, we withdraw and we reevaluate. And so these procedures are designed to reevaluate a situation where we encounter individuals who may be remaining on site who are not interested in our services. And we have now tailored the procedures to address those sorts of situations. The second key reason we're coming back for this conversation is a recent decision out of the Ninth Circuit referred to as the Grants Pass decision. And I've referenced this in a couple of council meetings because it is a pretty important decision that follows and expands upon the Boise v. Martin decision. What I want to say in this open setting as to that decision, the most important takeaway from that decision is that we've taken the Boise v. Martin standard of unless there is an available shelter, we shall not regulate as to camping and sleeping. And we've learned two new things. One, the court finds that we must have shelter available within the city. And the court was pretty clear on that. That issue is still subject to appeal, but the language in the decision, and then as the dissent points out as well, focuses on within the jurisdiction. So in that case, one of the plaintiffs, a member of the unhoused community, was forced by law enforcement to leave the city and park outside city limits. And the court said that was not adequate shelter. They were being forced out of the city. So that's one of the key takeaways. And the second is that the act of sleeping, which is constitutionally protected unless there is alternative realistic shelter, includes prohibitions against the use of bedding. So the city of Grants Pass had enacted a anti-camping prohibition, and they had said sleeping is fine, but as long as you don't have additional materials and debris that are often left in place. And the court said, not only do you have a constitutionally protected right to sleep, but you have a constitutionally protected right to protect yourself from the elements. And so that has now been clarified. The court does not go so far as to say that agencies can't regulate tents, but it does say agencies can't regulate the use of bedding, the debris that is used oftentimes for providing warmth. And again, it is that we cannot regulate those to the extent we do not have available shelter for that individual in that moment. And that's a key distinction because your mayor has done a lot of work towards getting us to balance the scales on that calculus so that we can move forward with regulations that protect or designed to protect the public's safety, including the members of the unhoused community who are living in these sorts of conditions.
And we're this close to having, as a matter of fact, I hand-delivered it yesterday, an agreement between us and the Vista Motel to provide short-term shelter for someone that wants services and is willing, and we need an interim step. So
Right.
We're about to add that to our toolbox too, so. Jay?
Yeah, Charlie, I really appreciate this. The summary is certainly much more helpful in trying to wade through it, so thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So the one area where I always run into a roadblock is the folks that do not accept services when something's available. Could you clarify?
That's the problem is it's few and far between, and that's why we need this other tool in our toolbox. Because if I don't, even if if they don't want to accept our services and I don't have
Okay, that's
shelter
what I
to
was wondering.
offer, we can't be firm with them.
If we have a shelter available and they refuse that shelter, we can then be firm with them.
Correct,
Tres-
yes.
Is it
Yes.
trespassing them technically then?
So
Correct, yes.
how would we do that with the Vista? Would we actually have a certain number of rooms that they would keep open?
That's, we've got, yes.
Yes,
go
so
ahead.
we have an agreement that we are going to put in place with your, obviously, approval to sign with the Vista Motel, essentially guaranteeing us rooms that will be on call. And these are agreements that are used by other agencies throughout the state of Washington for emergency shelter purposes. We put parameters around the use, the checking in process, the things that you would expect, as well as indemnity and damages claims. So it will be a contract between the city and Vista as to these occupants for these dedicated rooms and a term of use.
So we'd be paying them a set fee per day,
Correct.
Yep,
just to keep them open and use them whenever or
No.
not?
we only pay them when the room is used.
They're gonna agree to that?
Yes.
They're gonna
course
make
they
a
are.
room available to us 24/7, and they're only gonna receive compensation when somebody's in that room.
Yep.
So there isn't a point at which they could rent it out if
Well,
someone didn't show up?
The mayor would talk to them, and they wanna help.
So in a scenario where we've got people coming off the street, how long can they stay at the hotel or the motel?
We are proposing anywhere from 1 to 3 nights,
Okay.
and
And then?
And so the procedure is gonna call for communication with the heart coordinating team. I always get this wrong, the Kitsap Housing Resource Center, I always use
KCR.
Yeah, KCR. So, they have dedicated bed space in a hotel, or I think it's in a hotel, where they have, social workers who come and work with, the caseworkers who come and work with the individuals. I don't know if they actually have the caseworkers on staff yet. I know that they've had fluctuations in their staffing. But ideally, we would move towards a model like that if that's possible, but that's obviously outside the scope of what you
Is that-
currently have.
so,
Is
so
that,
one of our retreat topics is, we had a navigator position, and we have this informal agreement with the county that isn't ideal. And in my opinion, we need something more like the Heartland coordinator and not the navigator that we had previously. And I don't fully know what that looks like,
Right.
but we need our own person doing this outreach and these contacts, and, cause the situation we should have at hand isn't ideal, and
Right.
we need to do better.
So the circumstances that you were talking about, some after-action care,
Right, yeah.
counseling and what have you, would that be local, or is that something that you're trying to make locally available?
So,
Because,
In the
as you know, one of the challenges is they don't wanna go
Right.
anywhere else.
right.
They don't have the ability to.
Depends on where the services are. I mean,
Right.
we have, there's some treatment, just, in here in Port Orchard, it's wherever it's at. Talking to our code enforcement people, the vast majority of these people do not want our help.
Right.
And many of them call themselves constitutionalists, and they want to live off the grid. They don't want to follow any rules. They want to do drugs. They want, and to do drugs, they're likely committing crime in our community. And we need to offer these beds so that we can deal with that problem. We want to help these other folks, and we recognize there are limited resources there, and we are gonna put some folks short-term in some beds. We can't put them in the hotel long-term. The hotel does not, they got bit on long-term stays, because then they turn into a tenant, and then they have residency, and it's a whole big problem. And the hotel doesn't want any part of that, but they will help us out with short-term stays. Mark?
So assuming that anyone who takes this offer up to move into the Vista for a while has a set of rules and or guidelines that they are responsible
They
to
are
adhere to.
very, the hotel, there's no drugs, there's no smoking, there's no guests. It's all in this agreement that I'm hopeful you're gonna see next week. It's in their hands right now. We verbally negotiated this. Charlie put it into a two-page document, I think. It's pretty simple. We're gonna pay them $100 a night. We've agreed that if sometime these guests the room may need additional cleaning, they're gonna charge $25 an hour. Up to, I can't remember, there was a cap on that, and then if they do damage to the room, we're capping it at $500, but, and they have to get our permission
Where's the monitoring of, who's doing the monitoring of these folks that are there, ensuring that they're adhering to the rule?
The
They're
onus
guests
should be
of
on
the hotel.
Yeah, they're motel, they have to
They're
be
hotel
treated
guests,
like
and as
any
long as
hotel.
they follow the rules of the hotel, they can't cook in the room,
Correct, but if and when they don't follow those rules,
then they're gonna be evicted, just like any other guest of a hotel.
which would mean the Vista would
Exactly.
call 911.
Correct.
If they don't leave,
And
yes, and
Or they're back in
they
the
would be
system.
trespassed,
Just looking for protections for the
Yeah.
hotel.
yes.
Right, absolutely.
Jay?
So basically, if I understand this right, this is another step that we have to take as a city before we can take action for somebody, for lack of better words, is a constitutionalist, that doesn't want assistance or help. We've done this, 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 and this. Now this person is, for lack of better words, truly a bad actor.
So in the city jurisdiction really handicaps us with respect to Mile Hill Shelter.
Correct.
So is there a way to sort of get around that by offering one night at the Vista and then kicking them over to the shelter?
Yes, well, so again, and I think the mayor made this distinction in a very useful way. So the procedures and what I'm laying out is sort of the very basic compliance with the law requirements. So one night of shelter is adequate under the law.
Okay.
But you as, members of your community are cognizant that that's just moving people one night,
Right.
So the idea of having these additional safeguards to truly help the individual and also help your community would include a transfer to a shelter or to long-term housing. You have given your tax base as it relates to this issue to the county, so the county is using that funding in order to build a shelter to provide these services through their heart coordinator, and so you are relying on them to help with the back end help that needs to occur, to the extent the help needs to occur, to the extent the help is received. I do want to also flag, just based on these questions, that this use of the hotel room is the tool you needed in your toolbox to enforce under the legal parameters, because there's no current shelter constructed in the county. So it's going to be used very, very rarely, given our experience, because it is the individuals who are not assisted prior to the cleanup are few and far between. The heart coordinators are doing an excellent job of working with folks who want to be relocated prior to the cleanup date and getting them placed. It's the individuals who are not necessarily interested. We are legally obligated to offer them shelter in lieu of enforcement before we can move forward with enforcement. And so we are meeting our legal requirement and then being cognizant that there's so much more that needs to be done for these folks. You don't have the resources. You've given those to the county, trying to ask and utilize the county's resources for that purpose.
Councilor Fossey?
Kind of an off-the-wall question, but somewhat related. I recently toured a tiny home facility at a church in Tacoma.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of minimum standards that have to be provided to be considered a legitimate shelter? I mean, they have like a community section of portable restrooms, for example. Is that sufficient?
So I can answer that in part.
And I can dive into where that has been proposed 3 different locations, at least in South Kensington.
I understand the issues
Yeah.
that are around those. I'm just trying to get clarification on what is acceptable
I think it would be
for alternatives if a tiny home kind of structure with communal outside Santa cans, is that acceptable?
So, and the reason I have to caveat my answer is because the word acceptable, I'm stumbling over that. So tiny.
Read the law, here's a place that you could go.
Right, exactly. To me, there are a number of different versions of tiny home communities that are popping up. There's long-term tiny home communities, the Veterans Village, the Quixote Village. Those are constructed for long-term, so those have to be built in accordance with building code, with communal living. Then there are the more temporary tiny home structures. Depending on the jurisdiction in which that tiny home communal grouping is constructed, there will be applicable regulations. I apologize, I'm not familiar, maybe Nick may be familiar with your development code. If there is something specific to Port Orchard, I do not believe there is, that would regulate the issues with the construction and operation.
Nick just lit up over here, so.
Okay.
I was going to say the building code now includes an appendix for tiny homes and sets standards for tiny homes. So presumably, if they're built to the building code, they would meet the requirement.
So that would be for the long-term version. So you do have regulations there, but then some agencies have adopted sort of that interim, temporary shelter. As far as operation of those, however, I think it varies dramatically by jurisdiction. So City of Tacoma has one that, as of a newspaper article I read a week ago, was still operating successfully, manned 24 hours a day by a volunteer organization, funded by volunteers, and in part by the city. So I would assume there's Department of Health regulations that would apply, given that it's a congregation of people, but they are outdoors, so, acceptable from legal standard. I think that the Grants Pass decision speaks to the idea of dedicated camp space, and the dissent speaks at length about how the decision has essentially required that cities dedicate a park to encampments. In somewhat of a gross overgeneralization or sort of a sky is falling take, but they encourage agencies. The court seems to be encouraging agencies down that path. This decision, as with many others, is not necessarily having to grapple with the operational realities of that. 24 hours a day, sanitation issues. Yeah, and I know City of Olympia that's constructed some of the temporary tiny home areas following encampment cleanups, had significant issues with sanitation, with rodent infestations, with other concerns that come with that sort of a congregated living. So
I have to just see going from a tent, by yourself, just throwing your stuff everywhere, to getting some level of control.
right.
And the facility that I looked at, the one thing that came to mind is that they do have somebody on site. So from a security standpoint, it's not just, vigilantes having bonfires in the middle of a parking lot.
Right.
There is some level of rules to it, but it is one step up from a tent, in my opinion. But it's better than a tent, and there's dumpsters where they can throw their stuff, so we don't have more public works folks coming in every week hauling out dump trucks full of garbage, so.
Yes, so I think I understand your question, nuance of your question. The adequacy of providing shelter is based on what's reasonably necessary to survive.
Yeah.
And so if you were to create a park where tents were allowed to be utilized, then that would be sufficient as far as providing shelter. Yeah. But that comes with all the operational
Yeah,
concerns.
no, and there's
so,
also the
yeah.
neighborhood issues and all the zoning issues and all that sort of stuff that I appreciate.
Right.
It's
And
not
what's-
an easy thing to overcome, but I'm just trying to get in my mind,
Exactly.
what is the first alternative possible for
Exactly.
somebody living in the street corner?
Councilor Deere.
So, one of the challenges I understand with using the sheds we saw a lot were built in Kitson County in this area, and they weren't used, was they didn't meet code. So I was hoping for a clarification from Nick. Was he talking about, building code appendix for these tiny house sheds? Or were you talking about, could you clarify that, Nick?
Our code only allows tiny houses if they meet the appendix in the building code. We have no provision to allow people to live in a shed in Port Orchard.
What does that appendix ensure?
I believe it has minimum standards for insulation, weatherproofing. I'd have to pull the appendix. It's only a 2-page document from my recollection, but it just has minimum standards for a tiny house.
Is there a minimum size?
I'd have to pull the code. Honestly, I haven't recently.
The bunny trail, just wondering, trying to figure things out. So many times with these encampments, there's such a lot of trash. Yes, we pick it up and haul it away. Not every homeless person is without finances. Do we ever have code enforcement with homeless people? I mean, do we ever charge fines?
So,
Correct.
I,
How do you determine who gets charged with littering?
And if you can't, what's the point? Because they're just not gonna show up or pay.
right.
Well, yes and no, but I'm just wondering.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think your code enforcement team is looking at this through the perspective of focus primarily on encampments that are occurring on critical area and abandoned personal property in critical areas. So some encampments form near streams that are salmonid bearing, some encampments form near wellheads, or encampments that are dangerous to the occupants and to drivers if they're too close to roads. So I think code enforcement is triaging, and they're always complaint driven, as most code enforcement is. And so they focus on the complaints and the ones that fit that parameter. I think it's challenging as to abandoned personal property. It's almost impossible to track. We do our best through this procedure to hold items for 60 days and do our best to try to work with partners, whether it be the HART coordinator, who has great resources and a network that knows a number of the members of this community and is able to try to match items to the individual person. We can work with law enforcement to a certain extent, but a lot of information is private and we have to be siloed. But there are legal parameters as to the monetary penalties you can charge, and those are governed by the 8th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, the excessive penalties and excessive fines provision. And that dovetails with case law in Washington that we've had related to the vehicle as a homestead, and the idea that we can't hold someone's home in custody based on their inability to pay civil penalties. There's similar case law about driver's licenses. The state can no longer withhold your ability to have a driver's license based on unpaid speeding tickets. That's a gross oversimplification, but there are mechanisms now in place that require that we view the fines we levy through a lens of whether they are excessive as to the means of the individual. Yeah. And so, we absolutely do that calculus. I think one of the operational difficulties that the grants pass decision really highlights is the city is obligated to ensure that we are assisting and providing these individuals in the moment that we are trying to regulate, but we are also trying to elicit information from individuals who have no incentive to provide it to us. And the grants pass decision speaks to placing the burden on cities now to prove that these individuals are voluntarily homeless. The default is that they are involuntarily homeless. And anecdotally, we've had conversations with individuals, as the mayor indicated, sovereign citizens who we have no idea about their financial stability, but they are not interested in assistance from us. So it's unclear whether or not, how the court will ultimately come down on that particular issue of the burden of eliciting information from members of the community. You know, they may have very justifiable reasons for distrusting and not wanting to speak to us and not wanting to provide information. But I think that's where the heart coordinators can also assist us, because they definitely they can come at it from a different perspective, and have built relationships that we can utilize or benefit from in handling the community in a positive way.
Nick, get your hand raised.
I have an answer for Councilmember Diener's question about tiny homes. The requirements are pretty straightforward. You have to have a minimum ceiling height. The tiny house can't exceed 400 square feet, and there is an air leakage test required to ensure that the unit is sealed and only leaks air at some minimum level. And that's really it for tiny homes. As far as whether you can live in a shed, I don't believe the building code allows that, but that's something I could talk to Angela a little bit more about. But my understanding is that even though our building code exempts structures under 120 square feet, that that doesn't mean that you can live in them as a residential occupancy. But I could get back to you all on that.
No, I think you're correct there. I think that's, a couple of us understand that at least. I know that the previous units were basically sheds, and that's what stopped their implementation. It's because they didn't meet code. So, Nick, in that appendix, with those things that you just talked about, you still have to meet all other facets of code then as well. Ingress, egress, all that, presumably?
There is a requirement for ingress. It's pretty basic here. Our code, they adopted Appendix Q in 2018. We have not taken steps in our zoning code to specifically allow this or exempt it in our design standards, and so there is potentially some code conflict where we've not taken the steps to figure out how to make this permissible, whether it be an individual tiny house on a lot or a cluster of tiny homes. So we did amend the zoning code to allow for permanent supportive housing and other uses where a tiny house could potentially be set up under a different use category. But again, there may be some design standards or other things that that still make it hard to develop a site for tiny homes. Even things like a requirement for having pedestrian access serving the site, or paying traffic impact fees or water and sewer connection fees. So we really haven't taken a comprehensive look at how to allow tiny homes in our code.
I think that would be a worthwhile exercise, and also looking to call it something other than tiny homes or tiny houses, because I think that provides too much confusion.
Yeah,
And I think you've talked about this in the past, wanting to have something.
yes, it's either City of Olympia or Thurston County that has the Quixote Village. They developed a code scheme to allow that collaborative living arrangement. So,
Yeah.
And then another jurisdiction has the Veterans Village that's thriving. So they had to develop a whole code title just for that. So
Yeah.
there's
And
models.
in talking to the CBO for Kitsap County, he's gone to jurisdictions where he sees them, but he says they're just doing this. They're not even trying to acknowledge that those things exist. So there's a lot of potentially unsafe structures out there.
I have a couple of quick questions. Do we know that Vista Motel is accepting pets or animals?
They will not accept pets or animals.
So that might be one reason people are refusing.
That's
I guess, the
probably-
service
We
involved.
don't have a legal requirement.
And what are we doing with people in vehicles? Are we evicting them from where they're parking, or where are we putting them?
Vehicles haven't been a problem, but it is contemplated. I mean, sometimes the police department they run into folks sleeping in a parking lot, that, particularly with children, and this contemplates our agreement with the Vista, a family, to get them off the street sleeping in a car. It speaks to that. I could see us using that as a tool, somebody fleeing from domestic violence, and we come across them sleeping in a parking lot. I've heard these stories from our officers, so, we wanna help.
Yeah, and I know of at least one case where we did relocate individuals that were living in a vehicle that was inoperable. Absolutely, the sanitation was atrocious. And when we are voluntarily relocating folks, it's okay if they leave the jurisdiction in order to find those resources. We have to provide shelter at the moment we try to regulate. And so the case law isn't requiring that we have shelters that accommodate, that are specific to women and children, or that are specific to certain characteristics. We can use the resources that are bigger than just your jurisdiction, but it's making sure that in the moment of regulation, which is a moment we do not get to very often, is really what I want to drive home. We are able to work to voluntarily relocate in advance. So, any other? I had intended to walk through, but I think we've actually covered all the modifications to the policy, or to the procedure rather. So the procedure now calls for when an encampment is occupied, it reiterates existing procedure that we had to do as much outreach, coordinating through the hard coordinators team in advance of the cleanup. Once the cleanup occurs, the code enforcement officer a day prior will go out and take one more effort at trying to relocate folks voluntarily through the use of our hotel voucher. And then the actual cleanup day, the new step that we've injected is that law enforcement will assist with the sort of last regulatory moment of shelter, or we will have to enforce, or excuse me, the hotel, or we will have to enforce as to remove you from the site. And then once all occupants have been removed from the site and rehoused, then Public Works will come in and do the cleanup. Storage remains at 60 days of all items, and Public Works is currently storing items and has built a system for tracking those. So everything is functioning in accordance with the original procedure. We have just added additional robust steps in order to make sure that we have addressed the Grants Pass decision of shelter within the city. Yeah.
And as you stated in your memo, this is going to be evolving as the Ninth Circuit, total Ninth Circuit hears, and then possibly the Supreme Court. So stay tuned.
Yes, absolutely. As I mentioned before, the Grants Pass decision is now, there's a petition pending for it to be reviewed en banc, which means the full panel of the circuit court to hear it. I would note that the Martin v. Boise case, that same petition was filed and it was denied, and then no one appealed it further. So I think this one it will be appealed, regardless of whether the petition is granted. I think this one, in the way in which it places the burden on small cities, I mean, you thankfully have neighbors nearby who have resources. You have a county that's well funded. This is a very rural area of Oregon where they do not have, there's towns in Oregon that are very, very rural, have no resources whatsoever, and rely entirely on either the state or the counties. And so this decision places such a burden on municipalities that is an unfunded mandate to the extreme that I think it will be appealed. And this is an ever-evolving area.
This is just one other question. So when someone has been moved, relocated, what do you do if you find a weapon? Do our belongings search that go to, say, the hotel? I'm just curious, what does that look like and how is that done? I mean, Seattle just had a shooting of an officer for an eviction. And I'm wondering how everyone's protected, even the other occupants of the rooms.
We had unfortunately, we had our first incident in that regard, and going forward, we're not searching, we have no right to search anything. That's not even on the table. But we are going to have police present when we come to clean up an encampment, because we did have an unfortunate incident where someone who refused our services was in need of, mental health, was mentally ill and needed services, and reacted poorly to the public board. They weren't cleaning up his campsite, they were cleaning up the abandoned campsite. And we don't want to put our employees, this person had no history of being violent, but they, you know, pulled a knife. And so we are going to have police present to hopefully de-escalate and prevent those types of incidences, but we don't have the ability to search anybody's belongings.
Yeah, so Public Works uses its tools to gather the items and put them in storage. They're not searching, we're tracking through photos as far as to make sure that we haven't lost anything. If there are needles visible, if there are things that are unsafe, then we are contacting the appropriate authorities as to that. So if there were to be a weapon present, that would be dealt with, yeah, but we haven't run into that yet.
Okay. So our plan is to bring this policy for you guys' approval next week. I hope to have the agreement from Vista back by Friday so that we can also include it. If it isn't, it should follow shortly thereafter. I mean, they might ask for a modification or two in the agreement we handed off. I mean, they didn't see it until yesterday afternoon, so. But verbally, it recognized everything we discussed.
What's the fiscal impact, estimated fiscal impact?
Depends on how often I get used. I mean,
I
I think
understand that.
I
It's
could,
just wondering what-
I could
what we
foresee a
think.
few $1,000s a year.
Okay, you don't see it as being
Yeah.
major.
These have been one-offs when we've needed it.
Right.
Can we use the
Most-
1406 funds?
We cannot. But we can, I continue to, the county hasn't opened their grant window yet up for the Housing Kids House that it seems, I'm talking about this in my State of the City around the community, and it's being very well received.
Good.
It's a drop in the bucket, but 4 beds are better than nothing. And for us to have 4 permanently supportive beds in our community is a start. And maybe we build another one and another one thereafter, but we can use our $1,406 to run that house. And so I need a grant, and then I'm hoping you guys are gonna help too, you know, every
Swinging
other
the hammer.
pound nails.
Yes,
you
I
know?
know.
1% sales tax is.
That's
is that
where-
the grant would come from?
Yes,
Oh,
that's where we're, but they
I
haven't.
feel like they owe us.
Yeah, well, they do, because we
Right.
you know, although the commissioner that I have my verbal agreement with resigned yesterday.
Well, not quite yet.
But,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
we had a gentleman's
Memorialize,
agreement
yes.
that
Get it in writing.
we will be partnering with you, and we'll have a seat at the table, and they should be expecting this application from us, and we're asking for $400,000 to build a house, you know, with volunteer labor. And so we'll have a $800,000 house that, you know, with 4 beds. So it's not everything, it's not gonna solve the problem, but it's a start.
Cool.
Okay, I am gone next week, so I am going to quickly give you my mayor's report, because I know you guys will miss it next week.
Put the timer on.
So, I just want to, you know, John and I attended, I meant to bring this up last week, and I forgot. Paulsbo every year does a legislative dinner that ties in with AWC Action Days, and John and I were invited as guests. It's powerful. So I sat next to Christine Rolfus and what's Drew's Hanson? It was across the table from me, and so casual conversation, but also talking about legislation, and then it was so powerful to go down there and have dinner with them. And whether we partner with Paulsbo and bring our delegation into it, or we do our own, I'll put it in the mayor's budget. I mean, it might be $1,000 to treat our delegation to dinner, but it was so powerful. Wouldn't you agree, John?
No, I totally agree. I sat next to Representative Simmons and talked with her for a while as well.
I remember several years ago when I went down with you and John and stuff, we had.
With our lobbyists,
Our
yeah.
lobbyists, but also Michelle.
Michelle joined
us
us.
and stuff, you're right,
Yeah,
it was
it
very
just-
powerful. But it was,
Yeah,
yeah.
and we got one. I mean,
understand.
whether we piggyback on Paulsbo or we ramp
Yeah.
up that effort, we're gonna get them all.
Yeah, what I'm just saying is, I think that
Yeah.
went very well, yeah. I'm
Okay,
fully
so I
supportive.
just wanna, anybody opposed to that idea? Okay, that'll be something that we look to do next winter, or, you know, a year from now. my goodness, Elizabeth went on vacation and she came back and she's just been firing me job descriptions. I'm up to 5 of them, I think I've reviewed this week. So I'm required policy, every time we change a job, I have to report it to you. So we've updated the civil engineer 2, building inspector, project inspector, the procurement specialist, and the permit clerk job descriptions this week. And I don't know how she got all that done, but she did.
What's the project inspector?
So our public works
Okay.
inspector that goes out and, our public work projects, that's right. Oh, no, don't go quiet, okay. So, and that ends my mayor's report, so.
Okay, Mark, you're on for next
Okay,
week.
good of the order, before Brandy turns the recording off?
Yes, I have one that I hope each of you received, the invitation to the Energy Summit. I know Jay's not gonna be in town, but I would encourage and send you a personal invitation. March 30th at the conference center, I think it's gonna be very, very informative. Mayor Wheeler and I have been working with Puget Sound Energy, and it's gonna be kind of, having them share with us the current state of the grid and what they see coming down the pike and what they plan to do to be able to respond to these increasing demands. So I think it's gonna be worth your time, so.
So John and I are registered. If 3 more of you are gonna come, though, we need to know so that we can notice it properly. So, but and this evening, John and I, and there's about 8 people there tonight, we're at the open house for the Ruby Creek Park and Ride Lawn. So,
That was very cool. Very nice.
anything else for the good of the order? Okay, stop the recording, ready?
Recording stopped.